Did you know the most complex object in the known universe, the brain, only uses 20 watts of power? It will require a nuclear power plant to energize a computer the size of a city block to mimic your brain. So if someone calls you a dim bulb, that's a compliment. Michio Kaku. In all honesty, guys, welcome to today's session, and that is on the Meninges. The meninges is actually a membranous covering of the brain. Always remember that it has actually three main layers: the Pia Meta, which is the innermost layer, the Arachnoid Meta, which is the middle layer, and finally the Jura Meta, which is your outermost layer. Now, starting off with the Pia Meta. Pia means soft. Meta means mother. So it's actually a soft mother taking care of the central nervous system. The Pia Meta is actually a connective tissue layer, highly vascular, very thin, and it's tightly adhered to the surface of the brain and the spinal cord. And it remains the only covering to follow the entire brain and the spinal cord, following each of the grooves and sulci and indentations around. Next is the Arachnoid Meta. They say it's like a spider, hence arachnoid. Meta means mother, hence we say it's a spider web-like appearance. Why do we say that? It's actually because there are multiple delicate strands of connective tissue known as arachnoid trabeculi that loosely connect the two innermost layers of the meninges, namely the arachnoid and the Pia Meta. Always remember that it's avascular and has no innervation. But underneath it is an area or a space called the subarachnoid space, full of CSF, and has small protrusions of arachnoid meta called arachnoid granulation, which extends into the dura, specifically into the dural venous sinuses, to allow reabsorption of CSF back into the venous system. Moving on to the Jura Meta. Jura means tough or strong. Meta, as we know it, means mother. So it's a strong or tough mother covering the CNS. It has two main layers. The periosteal layer, which is labeled number 2, also known as the lamella, and it serves as the skull's inner periosteum called the endocranium. And the second layer is the meningeal layer, labeled number 1, which is quite deep to the periosteal layer. What is important to remember is that the spinal cord Jura Meta only has one layer, which is the meningeal layer. Between these two layers is formation of what we call dural venous sinuses, which are actually just blood channels that drain the venous blood in the cranium, finally to reach the internal jugular veins. The meningeal layer folds inward. It has inward folds actually that we call dural reflections. A good example is the falx cerebri, which actually separates the two hemispheres. Another example would be the tentorium cerebelli, which separates the cerebellum from the inferior portion of the occipital lobe. them. Hence, you have two potential areas, the supratentorial and the infratentorial compartments. The blood supply to the dura, it actually has supply from the anterior and posterior meningeal artery, but mainly is the middle meningeal artery. And the innervation of the dura supratentorially is by the trigeminal nerve V1, V2, and V3. And infratentorial is by two main things, the upper cervical nerve and the meningeal branch of the vagus. And finally, we talk about the potential spaces and its clinical significance. There are actually 5 areas a bleed can occur. It's either it's in what we call the epidural, also known as the extradural space, which is actually the space between your skull and the dura, and hence epidural hematoma. And it typically follows a meningeal artery rupture from traumatic injuries. Then you have the second space known as the subdural space, which is between the dura and the arachnoid, hence subdural hematoma, typically following rupture of the bridging veins. Then the next potential space is the subarachnoid space, which is actually just under the arachnoid layer and the Pia Meta, hence subarachnoid hemorrhage. And finally, there are 2 more areas where a bleed can occur. The intracerebral, which means it's intraparenchyma in the brain, it's tissue itself. And finally, it can be intraventricular in the ventricles of the brain. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the Meninges. We have reached the end. I thank you.